Have you ever felt like you're walking without ground beneath your feet, as if life itself were a dark cliff edge, and every step you take might be your last? No one warns you, but the truth is this: to truly live is to constantly face the unknown. There are no guarantees. Not even reason can shield you from collapse when fear wraps around your chest in the stillness of the night. You might have your life in order, your calendar full, your goals checked off one by one, and still, somewhere deep inside, you hear a question that refuses to go silent. What if none of this really matters? What if the structure, the systems, the knowledge you've gathered are powerless when loss strikes, when chaos arrives, when your soul aches and you can't even say why? There's a moment when reason goes quiet, when it can't translate what you're feeling, when it has no words for a sorrow that has no shape, and then you find yourself standing before the abyss. No bridge, no roadmap, no signs, just you and the silence, just you and the overwhelming dark that forces you to look inward. But maybe, just maybe, there's something fragile in your hand, something trembling, almost invisible, but real, a spark, a candle. And while it won't light the entire void, it's enough to show the next step. That's what faith is. Not religious doctrine, but a rebellious act, a choice to keep moving, even when you have no certainty. Because those who walk in darkness learn to trust not what they see, but the quiet resolve not to give up. Faith doesn't offer answers, it offers courage. And sometimes, that's the only thing that keeps you breathing. It's not about finding the way, it's about walking anyway. When your world has collapsed, when everything goes silent, if something in you still whispers, "Go," that whisper is everything, and it's yours. We were taught to chase answers, to trust data, books, and rules. We were sold the idea that if you think clearly, live efficiently, and follow the formula, things will work out. But what if that's not true? What if the certainty we've been promised is just a sleek illusion, well marketed, but hollow? Here's the part they never tell you. Your soul doesn't respond to logic. Pain doesn't follow formulas. You can have the perfect job, the right habits, the curated lifestyle, and still feel completely hollow inside, like you're reciting lines from a script you never wrote, like you're alive, but not living. Yes, reason builds systems, but it doesn't give meaning. It's great for designing bridges, apps, and careers, but it fails you when someone you love is gone. It can't console you when your heart breaks, and you can't even explain why. And still, that voice inside pushes, think harder, feel less, as if your intellect could rescue you from emotional collapse. There's something cruel in this arrangement. The more you rationalize your existence, the further you drift from it. The more you try to control your path, the more you realize control is a mirage. Can you really predict grief, plan your awakenings, schedule your healing like it's a to-do item? No, and that truth stings, because it crashes against everything you were taught to believe. They told you life was linear, that you rise, you progress, you win. But life is not a ladder. It's a spiral. You rise, you fall, you loop, you dissolve, you reform. What if the real issue isn't uncertainty, but your addiction to certainty? What if you don't need more answers, but a different way to walk with the questions? Imagine for a moment that everything you know vanishes. Your map burns, the path dissolves. Who are you without your beliefs? What remains when words fail you? Maybe that's where the real beginning lives. Not in clarity, but in rawness, in a kind of unfiltered rebirth. Because sometimes you have to get lost to stop being who the world told you to be. And when there's nothing left to figure out, maybe the only thing that matters is what you can still feel. That ember that hasn't gone out. That instinct you can't explain. That whisper that says, keep going, even if your hands shake, even if the night feels endless. That's where a different kind of wisdom begins. Not taught, not quoted, not analyzed, but birthed in the wound, in the silence, in the spaces you thought were dead. Maybe true awakening isn't about finding the right answers. Maybe it's about releasing the need to have them at all. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream, it doesn't bleed, it doesn't show up on scans or status updates, but it eats you alive from the inside. It's the emptiness that lingers even when everything looks fine. It's the sadness you can't explain, that creeping sense that, despite doing everything right, something essential inside you has gone dim. Your calendar is full, but your soul feels hollow. You smile in photos but cry in the shower. You hit your professional milestones, but struggle to sleep at night. Something inside you whispers, no, shouts, that this isn't the life you came here to live. And the worst part, you don't know how to break free. What if you're not living, but complying? What if your life has become so structured, so optimized, so perfectly rational, that there's no space left for the unpredictable, the wild, the real? Reason promised you safety, but instead, it handed you a cage, a beautifully decorated prison of clever justifications and smart routines, a belief system that traps more than it liberates. Can't you feel it? You overthink everything. You plan, you monitor, you optimize, and yet you feel utterly lost. What's the point of a well-managed life that's severed from your soul? Maybe you got used to not feeling too much, to muting uncomfortable questions, to staying busy just so you wouldn't have to listen. But there's a part of you, deep, ancient, untamed, that refuses to be silenced. That late-night whisper that says, this isn't it. There has to be more. And then fear enters. Because if you question what you know, what's left? If you let go of your certainties, what holds you up? It's easier to play along, to perform, to stay numb. But at what cost? What's the invisible price of living without inner truth? You can suppress that voice for a while. Convince yourself that this is just how life feels, that everyone's quietly miserable. But eventually, it breaks you. Eventually, everything you refuse to face will erupt through your body, your health, your emotions. Because life doesn't tolerate falsehood for long. And if you keep ignoring your soul, it will find a way to scream. Through anxiety, through despair, through isolation, through that suffocating sense that you're stuck in a life that was never truly yours. And what if what you fear most isn't failure, but freedom? Freedom to let go of logic, to stop living for expectations, to say, I don't know, to live inside mystery, to stumble, to feel, to believe in something that can't be measured or proven. What if being real hurts, but it's the only way to heal? You're trapped in a system that lulls you to sleep while demanding performance, a world that rewards appearances but punishes depth, a culture that worships intellect but mocks faith. But there's one thing reason will never give you: meaning, soul, a path that feels alive. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how much you know. What matters is how much you dare to feel, to lose your footing, to shatter, to rebuild, to live without guarantees. And that, my friend, can't be taught. It can only be chosen. Some philosophers build systems, polished frameworks where every concept locks neatly into place, like a glass cathedral of logic. But others walk among ruins, among ashes, among broken truths. Lev Shestov was one of them. He didn't come to explain life. He came to disturb it, to return to you that primal shiver, the feeling that reminds you, this is real. Shestov was born into chaos, Russian soil, a world unraveling, a century bleeding. But it wasn't history that shaped him most. It was the scandal of suffering, the absurdity of evil, the scream of injustice, and most of all, the utter helplessness of reason when it faces the unbearable. To Shestov, the greatest threat to a fully lived life wasn't emotion. It wasn't failure. It wasn't even sin. It was reason. Once it crowned itself king, that cold logic that tries to trap the infinite, that claims to define what's possible, that gives you calm, while quietly stealing your fire. Reason organizes, but it sterilizes. It shines, but it doesn't warm. Inspired by Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, and Nietzsche, Shestov dared to say the unspeakable, that humans weren't built to understand the mystery of life, but to confront it. That existence isn't tragic because of suffering, but because it defies control, because it is wild, sacred, untamable. And into that wildness, he throws faith, not as doctrine, not as obedience, not as blind belief, but as rebellion, as a cry from the soul, as the leap you take when the floor disappears, and there's no one to catch you. Kierkegaard spoke of the leap of faith as an act of creative despair. Shestov took it further. For him, faith wasn't about answers. It was the refusal to surrender to the tyranny of certainty. It was the power to look absurdity in the eye and say, I'll walk anyway, even if it hurts, even if nothing makes sense. Sounds crazy? Of course. Faith isn't rational. That's the point. It rises where reason breaks. It flickers where the lights have gone out. It's illogical and utterly human. Shestov believed real thought doesn't emerge in lecture halls. It's born in crisis. In that moment when everything you've built shatters, when no idea is enough. When you're left alone, with your wound, and maybe with God, or maybe just the abyss. But this isn't the God of institutions, not the one of textbooks or sermons. This is a darker, rawer presence, a God who shows up in your breakdown, in your shaking hands, in your unanswered questions, a God who doesn't explain but holds, a God who feels more like thunder than theology. Shestov didn't write to convince, he wrote to ignite. He wanted you to wake up, to break the illusion that you can ever control the mystery of being alive, because only when you stop trying to own life can you start living it. Reason gives you formulas. Faith gives you fire. Reason asks, why? Faith whispers, still. Reason maps the terrain. Faith steps off the edge. Reason wants proof. Faith needs only a flicker. And that flicker, that tiny trembling light you carry in the dark, is everything. You didn't choose the darkness, but you can choose what you do with it. You can stay frozen, waiting for someone to save you. Or you can strike a match. That tiny flame won't erase the abyss, but it can transform it into something sacred, into fertile ground, into a path that was invisible until now. There's a kind of strength that only awakens when everything collapses, a kind of faith that doesn't come from temples or teachings, but from trembling, from that exact moment when there are no answers left, and yet you still move, even if it hurts, even if fear screams that it's pointless. That's power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that endures. That doesn't flinch, that burns quietly in the middle of the storm, that keeps walking, even when your legs shake, even when no one's watching, even when you have no idea where this step will lead. You once believed faith was for the weak, but now you know. Only someone who's touched the bottom understands what it means to hold a flame in the dark. Fire doesn't lie. It either burns or it doesn't. And that spark in your chest, it's real, even if it has no name, even if the world doesn't get it. You could go back to autopilot, play the role, fit the mold, but deep down, you know it's not enough. There's a part of you that refuses to settle. That wants more, not more things, more soul, more presence, more truth. And truth doesn't live in formulas, not in gurus, not even in sacred books, if you're too afraid to live them. Because faith isn't what you believe, it's what you do with the emptiness. Every time you step forward through the fog, you feed that flame. Every time you stay true to yourself when comfort tempts you to betray it, the light grows. And every time you share that light, with a word, a glance, a moment of tenderness, something shifts in the world. You're not the only one in the dark, but you can be the first to light your flame. And that might just awaken others. Picture this, a mountainside at night. No sound, no path, only shadow. Then suddenly, a light, then another and another. Strangers, unseen and unknown, walking toward nothing, but walking still, because someone believed, someone ignited, someone refused to go dark, that someone could be you. You don't need to see the whole map, just enough to keep going, even if the flame flickers, even if your hands shake, even if you feel small. That little fire, glowing in the face of uncertainty, is more powerful than 1,000 solid answers, and you know this, because you've been there. You're there now. Power isn't about controlling life, it's about living it, with your soul on fire, and no one can do that for you. You don't have to light the whole world, just a few steps, because the truth is, you don't need to see the entire road. You just need enough light to not stop, and if you're walking, even in the dark, then you're alive. Shestov didn't come to hand you light, He came to show you that even in the deepest night, you can choose to spark it. Now it's your turn, not to understand, not to analyze, not to build another philosophy to hide behind, but to choose, to stand before the dark and not look away, to feel fear rise and not step back, to be surrounded by the unknown, with nothing left to grasp, and still to light your flame. Because faith doesn't wait until you feel ready. It doesn't ask for certainty. It shows up when the ground gives way, when everything you built falls apart, when you're stripped of your masks, and yet something inside you still whispers, keep going. That whisper is you. And if you've made it this far, if these words echo inside your chest, it's not a coincidence. That flicker inside you was already there, maybe small, maybe forgotten, maybe wounded, but alive. And now you can feel it. You know it's real. You can't pretend otherwise. So here's what I'll leave you with, not as a slogan, not as content, but as a declaration, as a flare in the night. My faith lights the path. Write it. Whisper it. Leave it in the comments below if it stirred something in you, not for the algorithm, but to make it real, to make it yours. Because sometimes the act of saying something out loud is how we stake a claim on our soul. And if there's someone in your life walking through shadows, someone who's silently unraveling behind a calm exterior, someone who needs light but doesn't know how to ask, send this to them. You never know what a single flame can awaken. Subscribe if this kind of journey matters to you, not because it's trendy, but because you're tired of noise and hunger for truth, because something in you knows that growth isn't glamorous, and awakening isn't a highlight reel. It's raw, it's sacred, and it deserves a space where we don't pretend. This channel isn't about answers. It's about questions that don't go away. It's about the silence most people avoid, and the courage it takes to sit with it. It's for the ones who've been cracked open by life and decided to feel more, not less. The truth is, no one else can carry this torch for you. You can read all the books, follow all the right people, repeat all the quotes, but until you burn, none of it matters. And burning doesn't mean breaking. It means becoming. It means letting the old ideas fall apart so something truer can rise. It means daring to build a life that feels real, not just impressive. It means stepping into your pain, not to fix it, but to listen to it, to let it speak, to let it teach. Because pain, when honored, becomes wisdom. Doubt, when faced, becomes a doorway. And faith, when chosen freely, becomes a fire that nothing, not fear, not failure, not even death, can extinguish. So go ahead, light your flame, even if your hands shake, even if your heart still doubts, even if all you can see is fog, especially then. Because it's in the fog, when the map is gone and the old truths don't hold, that something sacred happens. You begin to walk from the soul, not the script. That's not a metaphor. That's the rebirth of power. Not the power to control, but the power to live awake. And if you do that, if you walk with your eyes open and your flame intact, you will find others. You will meet souls like yours hidden in plain sight, waiting for a sign, waiting for you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll become the spark that ignites their fire too. So now ask yourself quietly, what do I choose to light when there's no light left? Because that answer is you.